Xenomorphs were created to be the perfect weapon that could erase entire species and form armies and communities. A lot of time and effort was put into making them feel like nature's perfect predator, and it shows. One of the most unique features that perfectly chimes with this biomechanical design philosophy is the tail. It's so well designed, it almost seems like evidence of an intelligent creator, or at least H.R. Giger's influence. Let's take a look at the Xenomorph's tail and how it might be one of the traits that's missing out next-gen Xenomorphs. The tail of the Xenomorph, an unforgettable bodily feature. No, we're not talking about the story of the Xenomorph, but quite literally the tale of this horror legend. A remarkable body part in an already insane anatomy. There's a bunch of incredible moments across the Alien franchise where that tail's the first thing you see before the rest of the monster creeps into view. The Xenomorph has a lot of cool features, but the tail has almost an identity of its own, allowing the Xenomorph to finish off its prey with an almost lazy energy. The legendary Harry Dean Stanton was probably the very first victim of the Xenomorph's attack, where the tail was something that completely hooked the character. His character, Brett, was looking for the cat Jonesy, only to end up at the landing gear bay. Quite a few things were hanging from the roof, and amongst them, we witnessed a tail uncoiling and slowly rising behind it. We don't even get a chance to fully absorb what we're seeing before Brett is snatched away into the darkness. Yeah, there was a clear opportunity for the Xenomorph to kill this guy using the tail alone, decided to save him for population expansion purposes. Brett would later be used as an incubator for facehuggers. This scene also marks the first time we get to see a fully grown Xenomorph, and it's shocking to see this bizarre creature crawling out of the darkness. The ridges and the sinewy chitinous components play an essential role in the structure of the tail. It becomes very clear when taking a look at its full body. The segments are each connected through what seems to be dense fibrous ligament, and that might just be why this tail has such amazing articulation. One of the first times we witnessed an established connection between the Predator and the Alien universe is through the presence of that spinal, which also included the tail itself, ending in a sharp, rigid tip, which is weaponized by the creature quite effectively. It's mind-blowing how much detail was put into the design of this monster. Each and every aspect of its anatomy is worth exploring, and sometimes we get to see those particular parts of the creature getting highlighted. Of course, credit where it's due to H.R. Giger for the design and Ridley Scott for sticking to his guns about the monster's specifications. The tail. Designing the Xenomorph's tail. While talking to Fantastic Films, director Ridley Scott was very clear about how he wanted the tail to work. According to him, we wanted to show he was big, but we didn't want the audience to know how big. Not quite sure whether he stands, hangs, or what. At that point, we wanted the whole interest of the audience to be focused on the head and the umbilical cord. It's really just a long muscle with immense tensile strength, but it looked like an umbilical. Scott was so dedicated to the umbilical bit that it turned into an on-set joke. As Joe Sorensen shared, Ridley Scott was a force to be reckoned with. He was so approachable and seemed to be very down to earth. There was no bluff and bluff. This was highlighted by the fact that one day, a guy was doing one of his impersonations, and he said Ridley was always trying to grasp and sort of describe verbally what he wanted in terms of pictures, and then he'd get frustrated and he'd just grab the camera, do it himself. This is Ridley. And he said, no, I want these umbilicals all hanging, like an alien's umbilical. Anyway, this was Guy doing this. He said, what I want is these umbilicals and the aliens hanging there, Ridley's right behind you. He took it completely on the chin, and I thought it was all right. The guy was banished for a bit. Functions of this tail. Tails are generally an evolutionary multi-purpose tool that works towards providing balance and locomotion for animals. Apart from that, there's the communication aspect where the tail allows the expression of emotions and other behavioral tendencies. But then, there are times when the tails are dedicated entirely to self-defense, as seen in scorpions, which have venomous stingers in their tails. Xenomorphs seem to have been inspired by this latter trait and focused on straying away from the usual neuromuscular and skeletal system because, after all, they're not entirely evolutionary design. There's hardly been a situation where we have witnessed a Xenomorph use its tail for the sake of balance. It's mostly been an extension of its warrior mode, the sharp stinger at the end that can stab through almost anything. In the case of these creatures, the tail is more of a product of H.R. Giger's biomechanical aesthetic, something that perfectly blends together insectoid and reptilian aesthetics resulting in a weapon that's almost an industrial design for a predator. Over the years, the various alien movies have given us many ways to examine how the tail works as one of the Xenomorph's main weapons. In fact, if you've played the game Dead by Daylight, the tail works as a ranged weapon that's capable of taking down survivors. The earliest designs had a scorpion-like stinger right at the tip of the tail, but eventually became more of a blade used for both slashing and stabbing. And this isn't any ordinary blade because it can pierce through armor and kill a variety of opponents. In the Alien vs. Predator games, it also uses its tail to stun its enemies before chomping in, but the tail's tip isn't the only part that can cause damage because the tail itself is incredibly strong. Flexible design allows it to easily coil around prey, mobilizing them before the Xenomorph gives them that kiss of death with its second jaw. Now, the tail length has varied significantly across the franchise over the years, and it also depends on the hierarchy. Queens can have tails that are 10 to 14 feet long, but other Xenomorphs have smaller ones. This doesn't mean that you can underestimate them, because these tails are still strong and can pick up victims with ease. So basically, the Xenomorphs have a means of sneaking into places using their tails, and they have enough strength to grab hold of their victims and just pull them out before massacring. Or there's always the option of just using the tail to butcher the victim without thinking too much about it. Is the stinger supposed to be poison? There is an eerie similarity between the Xenomorph's tail and that of a scorpion that might make some wonder if there was ever intended to be some sort of other purpose to the sharp end of the tail. It seems that early designs and concept art for the Xenomorph included a venomous tail that was supposed to incapacitate Gorman in Aliens, but they completely abandoned the idea and went for the much more brutal usage as a purely physical attack mechanism. I mean, it would have been cool to give him a scorpion-like tail, also would have made one of his more unique features very close to a creature we're already familiar with. The Xenomorph is all about mystery and intrigue. I mean, the suspense you feel as you wait for Brett to shine his light, fully grown Xenomorph in the 1979 film proves this. Can we chop the tail off? One of the smartest things you can do when confronting a Xenomorph is to make sure that the creature can't get too close to you, reducing every chance of that happening as much as possible. Generally, what happens is that the alien arrives and the victim is completely shaken by its appearance and gets stuck. Keeping your distance is the best way to do some damage, even though most common attacks seem to fail against the creature. But what if we just chopped off its tail before it had the chance to grab its victim? Well, a chopped off tail might get rid of the sharp blade at the end, thus make sure that the tail can't be used as a weapon, but the Xenomorph's blood is extremely acidic, and now you've created a hose spraying acid and melting everything around it. So if you're thinking of cutting off the tail, it might be better to make sure that you chop it off entirely, which might be difficult until you're quite close to the creature. That's the amazing thing about the way that this creature has been designed. It's almost as if it's supposed to be able to adapt to any damage that's done to it and still stand as a danger to the enemy. The Facehugger tail. Prepare to be a host. The Facehuggers might be the smallest member of the Xenomorph race, yet they have an extremely long tail. Every time we see them, it seems that they die the moment they've successfully injected their seed inside the victim. Their long tail is actually essential to fulfilling this purpose, because once the creature perfectly latches onto the face, uses the tail to wrap around the victim's neck, the victim has no chance of being saved. If someone tries to cut it off, it starts bleeding acid, and that puts the victim in danger too. Dorsal tubes, a mysterious tail-like structure from the spine. Apart from the tail, there's a weird dorsal tube or spine that extends from the back of the Xenomorph, and it can be confused for the tail as well. These are always present in pairs in what appears to be another spine called the tail. These things are located above the tail. We really have no idea what their purpose is in the bizarre biomechanical structure that Xenomorphs have. Some say that the dorsal tubes help the Xenomorph maintain balance, while others believe that there's supposed to be some sort of cooling mechanism for the creature's body. Since there's a pool of acid flowing through the Xenomorph's body, it wouldn't be surprising if there are certain exhausts that help maintain things inside the creature's anatomy. Next evolutionary step: lack of tails. While the tails have proven to be quite an interesting weapon in the arsenal of the aliens, it seems that the next evolutionary step is getting rid of this part of the Xenomorph. In fact, recent additions to the franchise have shown that the resultant Xenomorphs that are created from humans don't have the traditional tail. That doesn't mean that they're somehow lacking. In fact, absolute horror that was the offspring in Alien Romulus didn't have a tail, but that must have been because of the mutagen that Kay injected into herself. The idea that the next evolutionary step would lead to a lack of tails might have a larger in-universe biological impact, which could lead towards the adaptive streamlining of Xenomorphs. A lack of tails could lead to a more upright and tail-independent form, be a lot more sinister for humans to deal with. There's also an interesting evolutionary parallel here, because we humans also lost the need for our tail once our society grew more complex. Weaponizing the tail. The tail is one of the Xenomorph's most deadly weapons, and it signifies its graceful lethality. It seems that the predators, Yautja, understood this significance quite well. Known for collecting trophies from every species that they hunt, Yautja seem to have constructed formidable weapons from the remains of the Xenomorphs. The tail has been fashioned into a precise whip-like weapon that can slice through armor and flesh and sever limbs with complete precision. In fact, we got to witness this in action when the predator Wolf used the whip to great effect, killing off quite a few Xenomorphs in battle. But the predators didn't stop there. They took it up a notch with the electric Praetorian whip, which was the result of combining plasma energy and the tail of a more powerful Xenomorph. Marvelous verdict! There's a lot of interesting projects coming up in the Alien universe, and a crossover event has been hinted at in the next Predator film, so there's a chance we might just get to see these tail whips in action. Hopefully we'll see some sort of arc that lets us revisit the original design instead of going for more recent renditions where the tail's completely missing. In our opinion, the tail is a classic part of an essential design, but we want to hear your opinion. What's your favorite alien design? Let us know in the comments down below. Always looking for ideas for new videos. And if you enjoyed this content, give us a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.